I grew up in the shadow of a family that never wanted me. From the moment I could understand words, I knew I was different. Not in a way that made me special, but in a way that made me unwanted. My father, Richard, had 3 children from his first marriage: Emily, James, and Oliver. They were the real family. I was just the mistake, the child born from an affair that had shattered their perfect world. They never let me forget it. Growing up, I was invisible to them. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. Family trips happened without me. When I was around, they would lower their voices, exchange glances, make me feel like an intruder in my own home. But the worst part wasn't their silence, it was their cruelty. I still remember the night I heard them laughing about me. I had been about 13, standing in the hallway, too curious for my own good. Emily had said something about how I'd always be an outsider, how I wasn't even a real sibling. James had laughed and added, "She's just a reminder of Dad's biggest mistake." And Oliver? He didn't laugh. He didn't even say anything. He just sat there, nodding along, as if that was the natural order of things. Like I didn't matter. I should have confronted them. I should have screamed, demanded that they acknowledge me, that they see me, but I didn't. I just turned around and went to bed, swallowing the lump in my throat. Because deep down, I already knew the truth. They would never accept me. Then, when I was 19, my mother died in a car accident, and they celebrated, not openly, of course. But less than a month after her funeral, they threw a party, loud music, laughter, drinking. When I asked what the occasion was, Emily smirked and said, "The trash took itself out." I walked away that night and never looked back. I cut ties with them, with my father, with everything that had ever tied me to that house. I told myself I was done, that I would build a life where they couldn't touch me anymore. For 5 years, I kept that promise. Then my father died, and everything changed. I didn't cry when I heard the news. Maybe that makes me heartless, but I had made peace with losing my father long before he actually died. He had never fought for me, never shielded me from my siblings' hatred. He had been a ghost in my life long before he became one in death. But what did shake me was the will. I hadn't expected anything. If anything, I thought he would leave me nothing, a final confirmation that I had never truly been his daughter. But instead, he left me everything: his house, his money, and most importantly, his collection of rare paintings, artwork he had spent his whole life collecting, pieces that were worth more than anything my siblings could have dreamed of inheriting. It didn't make sense. Then I found the letter. It was short, scrawled in his familiar, uneven handwriting. "Sophia, I know I failed you. I know I wasn't the father you deserved, but I see that now. And this is the only way I know how to make it right. I hope you find peace in this. I'm sorry." It was the first time he had ever apologized, and he wasn't even alive to say it. I didn't know what to feel. Relief? Anger? Some twisted sense of validation? All I knew was that when my siblings found out, they were going to be furious. And I was right. The moment the will was read, Emily lost it. "This is a joke, right?" She spat, standing up so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "There's no way Dad would leave everything to her." The lawyer, an older man with tired eyes, simply shook his head. "It's all legally documented. Richard made these changes 6 months before he passed." James scoffed. "That doesn't make any sense." He barely spoke to her. Oliver, who had been silent this whole time, finally spoke up. "He must have been manipulated. Maybe she convinced him." "I didn't do anything," I interrupted, my voice steady. "I was just as shocked as you." Emily turned on me, her eyes burning with hatred. "You don't deserve it. You were never part of this family." I clenched my fists under the table. "And yet, here we are." James let out a dry laugh. "So that's it? You're just going to take everything and walk away?" I shrugged. "That's what you would have done, isn't it?" Their anger only grew from there. They threatened lawsuits, accused me of fraud, claimed my father had been coerced. But no matter how many times they protested, the will remained unchanged. My father's final act was to acknowledge me in the only way he knew how, and that drove them mad. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal threats, passive-aggressive messages, and outright harassment. Emily showed up at my door, demanding I do the right thing and split the inheritance. James sent emails full of barely veiled threats. Oliver, the quiet one, tried to play mediator, telling me that I should compromise for the sake of family. They had never treated me like family, and now They only saw me as an obstacle to what they believed was rightfully theirs. For the first time in my life, I had power over them, and I wasn't sure what to do with it. I knew they wouldn't accept the will. I knew they would fight, but I wasn't prepared for just how far they would go. The day after the reading, Emily started calling me nonstop. At first, I ignored her, thinking she'd eventually give up, but she didn't. Every few hours, my phone would buzz with another call, another message, another demand. When I finally picked up, her voice was ice cold. "You need to fix this," I sighed. "Fix what? Exactly?" "You know damn well what. You don't get to take everything, Sophia. Dad barely even cared about you." I clenched my jaw. He cared enough to leave me everything. There was a long pause before she snapped, "You're using this to punish us." "Punish you?" I let out a bitter laugh. "You spent years pretending I didn't exist, and now you want to play the victim?" Emily inhaled sharply, like she was about to say something cruel, but then she stopped herself. Instead, she lowered her voice and tried a different tactic. "Fine, you're right. We weren't fair to you. But this isn't just about us, it's about what's right. You know Dad wanted us to have something. You can't seriously believe he meant to cut us out entirely." I hesitated, because part of me agreed. It didn't make sense. My father had spent his entire life prioritizing them over me. Why would he suddenly change his mind at the last second? "Look, let's just talk," Emily continued, face to face. "No lawyers, just us." I almost agreed. Almost. But then I remembered the way they had laughed after my mother died, the way they had treated me my whole life. I hung up instead. Ignoring Emily only made things worse. The next day, I got an email from a lawyer representing James and Oliver, claiming that they were contesting the will. They were arguing that Dad had been mentally unfit when he signed the documents, that he had been pressured into changing his estate plan. It was ridiculous. My father had been in perfect mental health when he made the changes, and yet I couldn't shake the anxiety that they might actually win. Money could do strange things in court, and they had more of it than I did. Then, the rumors started. A cousin messaged me out of the blue. "Hey, I heard some things. Are you okay?" When I asked what they meant, they hesitated before replying. "Emily's telling people you manipulated Dad, that you cut him off from everyone before he died. That's not true, right?" I felt sick, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I knew how easily people would believe it. I had spent my entire life as the family outcast. It wasn't a stretch for people to assume I was capable of something like that, and Emily knew it. A week after the will reading, I came home to find my front door unlocked. My stomach dropped. I knew I had locked it before leaving that morning. Cautiously, I stepped inside. The living room was untouched, but as I moved toward my father's study, the room where I had stored his belongings, I felt my chest tighten. The door was open. Inside, the drawers had been pulled out, their contents scattered across the floor. The safe where I had stored the most valuable documents was slightly ajar, as if someone had tried to break in but failed. And on the desk, sitting right in the middle of the mess, was a note. "This isn't over." I stumbled back, my pulse pounding in my ears. Who had done this? Emily? James? Someone they had hired? I didn't know. But I knew one thing for sure. This was war. That night, I packed a small bag and left. I couldn't stay in that house, not while I didn't know what they were capable of. I checked into a hotel under a different name, turned off my phone, and spent hours staring at the ceiling, trying to figure out my next move. Part of me wanted to fight, to hold my ground and make them suffer the way they had made me suffer. But another part of me, the tired part, the part that had spent years wishing for something that would never be wondered if it was worth it. I had spent my whole life wanting a family that would never love me, and now I had proof, written in legal documents and whispered in threats, that I would never belong. So why was I still holding on? The next morning, I called my lawyer. "I want to sell the house," I said, "and everything in it." It was time to let go. Selling the house wasn't just a financial decision. It was my way of severing the last tie that bound me to a family that had never wanted me. When my lawyer put it on the market, I expected backlash from Emily, James, and Oliver. But I didn't expect just how far they'd go to stop me. First, they tried to block the sale by filing a legal motion, claiming I had no right to sell what was meant to be a family home. Their argument was weak legally. Everything belonged to me, but it was enough to delay the process. Enough to make me second-guess whether I was truly free from them. Then, the harassment started again. Late-night calls from unknown numbers, messages filled with accusations and insults. James even had the audacity to show up at my workplace, pretending to be there for an unrelated matter. But I knew why he was there. He wanted to remind me that they weren't going to let this go. "You're making a mistake, Sophia," he had said, standing just a little too close for comfort. "You think this is over? It's not. You don't get to just walk away." I stared at him, feeling something shift inside me. The old version of me, the girl who had spent years seeking their approval, hoping for scraps of kindness, would have backed down, would have given in just to keep the peace. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I smiled, meeting his gaze head-on. "I already have," and then I walked away. A few days later, as I was sorting through the last of my father's belongings, I found something that made my breath catch in my throat, an envelope, tucked away inside one of his old books. My name was written on the front. Hands shaking, I opened it. "Sophia, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And it means I failed you. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't expect it. But I need you to know that I saw you. That I always saw you. I knew how they treated you. I knew how alone you felt. And I let it happen because I was a coward. Because I thought keeping the peace was more important than protecting you. I was wrong. I don't know if this letter makes a difference. I don't know if it can undo the years of hurt. But if nothing else, I hope it gives you some kind of closure. You deserved better. And I'm sorry I didn't give it to you, Dad." I stared at the letter for what felt like hours, my vision blurring. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was something. And for the first time in my life, I let myself grieve not just for my father, but for the childhood I never had, for the love I had always longed for but never received. The house finally sold 2 weeks later. The paperwork was done, the keys were handed over, and just like that, I was free. Or so I thought. The night before I was set to leave town, there was a knock on my hotel door. When I opened it, Emily was standing there, looking disheveled and furious. "You're really doing this," she said, stepping inside before I could stop her. "You're selling our home." "It was never yours," I replied calmly. "And we both know that." Her jaw tightened. "You think this means you win? That you're somehow better than us?" I exhaled slowly, realizing something in that moment. This wasn't just about money for Emily. It wasn't just about losing a house or an inheritance. It was about control. She had spent her entire life believing she was superior to me, that I was the outsider, the unwanted mistake. And now, for the first time, she wasn't the one with power. That terrified her. "This was never a competition," I told her. "I'm just done playing your game." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, without another word, she turned and walked away. And just like that, the last thread binding me to my past unraveled. I left town the next morning, boarding a plane with nothing but a suitcase and the knowledge that, for the first time in my life, I was truly free. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I was finally choosing myself. Leaving town felt like shedding an old skin. For the first time in my life, I was untethered, free from the weight of my father's house, free from my half-siblings' manipulations, free to start over. But the thing about starting over is that it's not as easy as it sounds. The money from the estate was more than enough to set me up comfortably. I could have bought a new house, started a business, and traveled the world. And yet, for the first few weeks, I did nothing. I rented a small apartment in a quiet city, far from where I had grown up. I told myself I needed time to figure out my next step. But the truth was, I didn't know how to exist without constantly being on the defensive, without waiting for the next attack. For years, my life had revolved around surviving my family. Now that they were gone, who was I supposed to be? One afternoon, as I was sorting through my emails, I saw a message from an unknown sender. The subject line simply read, "I'm sorry." I almost deleted it without opening it. I had spent years receiving apologies that weren't real, just empty words meant to manipulate me into giving more than I had. But something made me click. It was from Oliver. "Sophia, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it anyway. I'm sorry. For everything. For standing by while Emily and James treated you like you were nothing. For not speaking up when I should have. I let them dictate how I saw you, and I regret it more than I can say. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. I see what we did, and I hate myself for it. Wherever you are, I hope you're happy. Oliver." I read the email 3 times, my chest tightening with emotions I couldn't quite name. Part of me wanted to delete it and move on, but another part, one I hadn't expected, felt something almost like relief, because for the first time, someone from that family was admitting the truth. I didn't respond right away. I wasn't sure if I wanted to, but I found myself thinking about Oliver more than I expected. Unlike Emily and James, he had never been outright cruel to me. He had been complicit, yes, but he had also been silent, a ghost in the background while his siblings led the charge against me. Was his silence just as bad as their words? Maybe, but maybe it also meant he was capable of change. A week later, I finally replied, "Oliver, I don't know what you expect me to say. I appreciate your words, but they don't erase the past. Nothing ever will. But I hope you learn from this. I hope you don't make the same mistake again with someone else. And I hope one day you forgive yourself, Sophia." I didn't expect a reply, and I didn't need one. Just writing those words felt like releasing something I hadn't even realized I was still holding on to. For the first time, I felt lighter. With that weight lifted, I finally allowed myself to think about what I actually wanted. Not what I had been running from, not what I had been fighting against, but what I wanted to build for myself. I had always loved art. It was one of the few things my father and I had in common, even if we never shared it directly. His collection of rare paintings had been his pride and joy, but I had always been more interested in creating art than collecting it. So I enrolled in a local art school. It was terrifying at first, walking into a space where no one knew me, where I had to introduce myself without the context of my past. But it was also exhilarating. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who saw me for who I was, not for where I came from. I painted every day, pouring years of frustration, grief, and hope onto the canvas. And slowly, I started to feel like myself again. Not Sophia, the unwanted child. Not Sophia, the outcast. Just Sophia. Months passed, and my life began to take shape in ways I never expected. I made friends, real friends, not people who tolerated me out of obligation. I found joy in the smallest things: morning coffee, long walks, the smell of fresh paint in the studio. And then, one day, an email arrived from a gallery owner. They had seen my work in a student showcase and wanted to feature my paintings in an upcoming exhibition. It was a small gallery, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I stared at the email for a long time, tears welling in my eyes, not because I was sad, but because, for the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. I had spent my whole life trying to prove something to a family that never cared. Now, I had nothing to prove. The night of the gallery exhibition, I stood in the center of a room filled with strangers, my paintings lining the walls. People moved from piece to piece, whispering their thoughts, pointing out details I had agonized over in silence. It felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold, someone who had truly made it. And then, just as I was starting to relax, I saw him, Oliver. He was standing near the entrance, hands shoved into his pockets, looking like he wasn't sure if he should be there. Our eyes met, and for a moment, neither of us moved. Then, slowly, he walked toward me. "Sophia," he said, his voice hesitant. "I didn't know if you'd want me here." I crossed my arms. "How did you even find out about this?" "Your work was featured in a local arts magazine. When I saw your name, I had to come." I studied him, trying to read the truth behind his words. He looked different. Older, maybe. More tired. But there was something else, too. Something softer. Less sure of himself than the Oliver I had grown up with. "I just wanted to see what you built," he continued, "and to say congratulations." A long silence stretched between us. Finally, I exhaled. "Thank you." His shoulders relaxed slightly. "You did all of this on your own. I hope you know that. For so long, I had believed my family defined me, that no matter how far I ran, I would always be the girl they cast aside, the mistake they never wanted. But standing there, in that gallery, with people admiring something I had created, I realized something important. Oliver was right. I had done this on my own. After the exhibition, Oliver and I sat on a bench outside the gallery, the cool night air wrapping around us. "Emily and James still won't let it go," he admitted. "They think you ruined everything." I sighed, shaking my head. "I didn't ruin anything. I just stopped letting them control me." "I know." He hesitated before adding, "I don't talk to them much anymore. Not since, well, Everything. I raised an eyebrow. You cut them off? Not completely, but enough. After the will, after they refused to see their own mistakes. I just couldn't be part of it anymore. I wasn't sure how to feel about that. Part of me wanted to say too little, too late. But another part, the part of me that had been longing for anyone in my family to finally understand, felt something close to relief. I know it doesn't fix things, Oliver continued, running a hand through his hair, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. What we did to you, how we made you feel. I stared at the ground, emotions swirling inside me. I could have unleashed years of anger on him right then and there. I could have told him that his silence had been just as painful as Emily's cruelty, that I had spent my whole life waiting for someone to stand up for me, and he never had. But instead, I just said, thank you, because in the end, I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't looking for an apology that would erase the past. I was just looking to move forward. A few weeks later, I got an invitation in the mail. It was from Oliver. He was getting married. For a long time, I just sat there, staring at the envelope. My first instinct was to throw it away. After everything, why would I want to go? Why would I willingly step back into a world that had spent so long shutting me out? But then I thought about Oliver sitting at the gallery, really trying to fix what had been broken. I thought about how, for the first time in my life, I had a choice. So, I went. The wedding was beautiful, small, intimate, nothing like the over-the-top family gatherings I remembered from my childhood. When I arrived, Oliver looked genuinely surprised to see me. You came, he said, his voice almost disbelieving. Yeah, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I did. Emily and James were there, of course. They ignored me the entire time. And for once, I didn't care, because they didn't matter anymore. I wasn't there for them. I was there for me, and that was enough. As I stood on the dance floor, watching Oliver and his new wife share their first dance, I realized something. For years, I had believed that my family had shaped me, that their rejection had defined me. But the truth was, I had defined myself. I had built something out of nothing. I had found a passion, a career, a life that was mine, and I had done it without them. As I left the wedding that night, I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel regret. I just felt free. Leaving Oliver's wedding that night, I felt something settle inside me, a quiet kind of peace I had never known before. For years, I had carried the weight of my family's rejection like an open wound, but now, for the first time, I felt light. Not because things had been fixed, not because I had suddenly found a place among them, but because I had stopped needing one. I was no longer the girl desperate for their approval. I was no longer waiting for an apology that would never come, or for acceptance that had always been conditional. I had built my own life, one that was full, vibrant, and entirely mine. And that was enough. A few months after the wedding, I received a letter from a lawyer's office. At first, my stomach twisted. I had spent so much time dealing with legal threats from Emily and James that I thought this was another attempt to take something from me. But when I opened it, I was surprised. It was about my grandmother's estate. Even though she had never included me in her life, there were still unresolved financial matters. Since my father had inherited everything and passed it on to me, I was now the sole beneficiary of what remained. It wasn't much, a few savings bonds, some property rights, but the lawyer needed my signature to finalize everything. For a long time, I just stared at the papers. I thought about the woman who had ignored me my entire life, the woman who had poured all of her love into my half-siblings while barely acknowledging my existence. And now, in some strange twist of fate, I was the last piece of her legacy. I could have sold everything. I could have erased every last trace of her from my life. But instead, I did something unexpected. I donated it all. Every last penny went to a charity for children who had grown up without real families. I didn't need the money. And honestly, I didn't want it. But if I could take something cold and empty and turn it into something good, then maybe, just maybe, that was enough. And with that, I closed the last chapter of my past. With everything settled, I finally let myself think about my future. For the first time, I allowed myself to dream not about running away, not about escaping, but about building. I used part of the inheritance to buy a small house near the coast. Nothing extravagant, just a quiet place with big windows and enough space for an art studio. A place that was mine, where no ghosts of the past lingered. The day I moved in, I stood in the empty living room, taking it all in. This wasn't just a house. It was proof proof that I had survived, proof that I had built something real. I spent weeks decorating it, making it feel like home, filling the walls with paintings, shelves with books, the air with music. And as I sat on my porch one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back. One afternoon, as I was working in my studio, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I was shocked to see Emily standing there. She looked different, tired, hollow almost. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," she said. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "What do you want?" She sighed, shifting on her feet. "I don't know. I wanted to see how you were." I studied her carefully. This wasn't the Emily I had grown up with, the one who had taken pleasure in making me feel small. This was someone else, someone lost. "I'm fine," I said simply. She nodded, glancing past me into the house. "So this is your place?" "Yeah, it's nice." We stood there in silence for a long moment. Then, finally, she said, "James and I don't talk much anymore. He's still angry about the will. About you." I raised an eyebrow. "And you?" She exhaled. "I don't know. I used to think I hated you, that you were the reason everything fell apart. But maybe we were just looking for someone to blame." For a moment, I almost let myself hope, almost let myself believe that this was the beginning of something new. But deep down, I knew better. Emily wasn't here to make amends. She was here because she didn't know where else to go, because for the first time in her life, she didn't have control. And I wasn't going to be the one to give it back to her. "I hope you figure it out," I said, stepping back. "But I'm done being part of that story." She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something else, but then she just nodded. "Take care, Sophia." And then she walked away. I watched her go, waiting for the familiar sting of rejection. But it never came, because this time I was the one walking away. Years passed, seasons changed, and slowly, the scars of my past faded into memories. My art flourished. I opened my own gallery, showcasing not just my work, but the work of other artists who had stories to tell. My house became a home, filled with laughter and warmth, with friendships built on something real. And most importantly, I learned to love myself, not for who my family wanted me to be, but for who I had become, despite them. One evening, as I stood in my gallery, watching the people who had come to celebrate my latest exhibition, I realized something. I had spent so much of my life believing I had to fight for a place in this world, that I had to prove I was worthy of love, of happiness, of belonging. But the truth was, I had never needed their approval. I had never needed their love. I had always had enough, and I always would be.